So let me just try and start the whole discussion with posing just uh, a broad sweep sort of picture of, in urban areas, particularly in big cities and towns, uh, environment and socio-ecologies that we are living around is really about a lived environment. So, unlike, wilderness or remote places, this is what we're talking about is that it's a lived environment. It's something which includes both, you know, whether it's rivers or forests or other kinds of or beaches that have been which are associated with nature. There's also a lived nature. It's a lived nature that people have created over a period of time by being in that space for generations. And in that regard, let me just start by saying that environment in urban areas like the way we are talking about today is understood in different ways. So sometimes people understand environment by association or memory. So it's about the trees you would have planted as a child with your parents or on a plantation drive. It's a particular bird or a butterfly that you might associate environment with. Uh, it's also the shade of a tree that or any other plant you would have gone to in a city under which you've read your favorite book or a comic book. So it's about association. It's environment is understood by people uh, by association. Or you might have built castles on a beach. um, Environment is also understood through the idea of space or place. So, it could be a happy place for you. For instance, it's the place you might have gone, and the say the Delhi Ridge or the RA Forest in Mumbai. You might have gone for a trek or a walk for. It could be Lodi Gardens or Cubbon Park, where you might have gone for picnics. It's about a particular place that we're talking about. It's about say an area like Sanjay Van around Delhi, where you might have spotted your first deer or a first big a kite or something like that. It's about the place that is etched in your thought, and that's what, when you think environment, you think of that in the first place. It could be a river. Environment could be a river that flows through the city. So it's about, say, uh, so many cities have rivers flowing through it, and as cities have expanded, have they taken over floodplains. So it's about the river. So it's a happy memory related to it. Or it's as I said, you would go in coastal towns, you would go to the beach for a run, or with your family or with your friends or anything like that. So I mean, there are various associations of a place, a happy place, that you would talk about. Environment is also understood with a not so happy place. So more recently than ever, for not everybody, environment is really a happy place. Suppose you're living next to a landfill, or your favorite river where you would go regularly is now foaming a lot. There's a lot of industrial effluent or waste there. So it's not a happy association, but it's also an association with a place which is not happy. Uh, Environment, so this there is so we spoke about it as association. It's about a place or a space that we would associate environment with. It could also be very clearly an impact or a problem that we begin associating environment with. For instance, most spoken about today is, say, air pollution or groundwater. um, uh, it is also increasingly being spoken about, like there are two houses being constructed in the lane that I live in, so it's construction dust. It's like, it's all about that. In more in other kinds of in really outside of big metros, it's about mining trucks going in, so it's about the impact that you feel, which is associated with the idea of, or you understand environment through that. or just the traffic fumes, the traffic jams become part of the environment. Or lots of us in urban areas and other places, we talk about the plastic menace that is a problem, that becomes a problem, that when you first think of environment, it is that. But then you start doing policy work. And if you start doing policy work, if you're interested in doing policy and legal work, you also try and look for, okay, if I have to pin these things not in the way I look at it or I understand it commonsensically, but if I have to locate it in text, if the policy and law, what do I look for it? So we have a legal definition for environment in the Environment Protection Act, and the legal definition for environment basically says this. You might already know this, but let me read it out. Environment includes water, air, and land, and the interrelationship which exists among and between water, air, and land, and human beings, other living creatures, plants, microorganisms, and property. So in many ways, this definition of environment embeds human beings very much at the heart of the idea of environment. We are the environment. So each action, and because we're interrelated, each action that we take or don't take is very much part of our understanding and even the legal understanding of environment. So if this is the case, what in law and policy try to do next is really try and address the environmental question as a resource question. So, when the idea is that you need laws and policies to be able to govern. When you govern, you're not trying to govern a memory or an association. You are trying to, laws and policy tend to approach environment as a resource question. And when it's a resource question, environment, environment law policy or policies and laws that have a bearing on environment, they try and regulate the use of this resource. Now I'll go more deeper into this and more further into this, and look forward to even discussing and having your questions after that. So how does say, when you're talking about governments or each one of us who might want to do policy work or legal work around environment, the questions that kind of approach us when it comes to policy work is, how should environment be used? So, the resource, when it's centered around the resource, how should environment be used and by whom? So, for instance, the question that comes up is that which government agency is going to regulate water? If I'm a developer, who do I take permission from to get an air pollution clean air certificate? So it's about who should use it and by whom. So for instance, where there is a district park, should there be a government office? So I mean, these are big environmental questions. Or if there's an open public space, should it be built over? How many trees should actually be cut for a flyover and not? And so who should be dealing with that? So how should it be used and by whom? The second is, who decides and what is the process through which this decision is taken? So increasingly, especially when it comes to urban problems, and of course in rural areas as well, but because we're focusing on urban areas, the issue of consent, public participation is increasingly becoming a demand, and B, also, you realize how few spaces there are to where this question really whether there is a space for citizens to participate, whether in what decisions have to be taken, or just planning, or just give suggestions to the government and different government agencies. The third question that, when it comes to approaching environment as a resource question, is it only about use, or how do we approach environment or environmental resources or natural resources or lived environment? How can it be conserved and preserved? So that's where you have particular legal regimes, laws, policies that say regulate, declare air pollution control areas, or you have tree protection laws, which are very focused on preserving a certain kinds of species, or a certain element, or for that matter, special laws for wetland management and degradation. So all these questions that have approached environment as a resource are also trying to raise questions in their text in terms of uh, its distribution, its use, and within that, how much of it should we actually be consuming as human beings, and how much of it actually we should be preserving and conserving. Now, with this backdrop, if we try and get into the question of environmental policy and environmental regulation for the urban environment, and the urban environment, let's try and look at 5 points, knowing very well that uh, there is increasingly a blurring boundary between what is urban and what is rural. Uh, and you see that in big cities, you see that in smaller towns, you see that everywhere. So there's a blurring boundary. Urban areas are expanding, rural areas are coming towards urban areas. There is a boundary that gets blurred increasingly. That's why you have flamingos near a really high industrial facility sometimes. So with that backdrop in mind, let's look at 5 points. First, urban and rural areas both are highly stratified spaces. Caste, class, gender, religion really determine our access to what is considered a clean, healthy environment. So when you have a waste to energy plant located not so far away from where I live, in an area in Okhla, the Okhla waste to energy plant, when you look at the wind direction of that waste to energy plant, I'm not even getting into the question of whether it's a good technology, bad technology, all of that. Where it is located, if you see the wind direction, it goes into an area called the Haji Colony, or a tourist hostel where students study, where you can very clearly see where the toxic winds are blowing. So your direction is not towards Escorts Hospital or New Friends Colony. It's towards Haji Colony. So you see that in a very stratified area, the access to clean environment really has very important connotations and inherent hierarchies when it comes to class, gender, and religion. Number two is urban areas, as we spoke about, are continuously merging with rural and peri-urban areas. And this expanding footprint, if you see in planning documents, you will see things like words that are used such as urbanizable. When you use the word urbanizable, the word urbanizable has a very clear hierarchy of value in it. For instance, an urban area is actually a better place. So you are actually declaring areas as urbanizable, where you would have big apartment complexes, shopping malls, and other kinds of industrial or other infrastructure uses that come up. So these are, potentially places where you could bring into the urban fray. But these fluid spaces between urban and rural. This is where urban areas are expanding their footprint. Three is, how when you're talking about regulation and urban environments. Three is what we tend to miss often is the industrial geographies around cities, inside towns, or adjoining villages. So you have big industrial areas, small scale, medium scale industrial areas within towns and cities, or around towns and cities, which we need to take care of when we're talking about dealing with or approaching policy matters. So, these are also very clearly, when you raise the questions about where are water discharge or effluent discharge points that are located, these are from industries around cities, so your water resources really get impacted by these industrial geographies, and that's why it's important to bring them into policy planning and envisage those realities very much in there. Or where large garbage landfills get located, they are on the periphery of the city, and the city is expanding, and those a landfill, that's the Deonar landfill in Mumbai, or the Ghazipur landfill in Delhi, they're coming closer and closer within the urban area. So, you're having your habitation expand, but these are very much becoming part of the city. And you have, similarly, there are other kinds of industrial areas within or in the periphery of the city. So in our imagination of policy, we have to keep that in mind. Then there are two very interesting interplays that are going on with this in the last 2 points that I'll highlight in this section. One is basically this thing about the idea that rural areas need to be developed and urban areas need to be redeveloped. So you're talking about rural areas are backward, so they need to be developed, locating mining projects, industrial projects there. But urban areas, you actually start, because their shape and size have changed, and the demographic distribution has changed, you want to redevelop it. So you have enough and more projects that are coming up which talk about redeveloping the heart of South Delhi to include commercial real estate right there. Or for that matter, you have a peripheral ring road that needs to be created to actually move people around. So, in this whole juggernaut, and I'll move to the next section, in this entire juggernaut, policy tends to treat places in urban areas as empty spaces. So rural areas in any case are backward, they need to change. But when we are now approaching policy in urban areas, this is a mindset we need to change, is that we are approaching urban areas as an empty space. So basically, they have to, they are being designed to either build over. So you actually cut down all the trees in South Delhi, 16,500 trees, because you want to build basements and you want to build high rises, and you cannot visualize that space with the trees and the existing infrastructure in it. So, urban planning is not able to visualize that. So it's not an empty space, it's actually a lived space. It's been created by people living around. Some of it is natural, some of it has been, made to be natural over a period of time. The second part that is happening increasingly in urban areas is, you are trying to treat areas around the urban area, whether it is the sea or it is forests or it is wetlands, as places where you could dump. So you either build or you dump. So if you cannot accommodate, the waste of an urban area in the within the administrative boundary, you take, that's why you have all sewage treatment plants located on the coast, and they will pick up the urban area and dump it in the sea. So the sea is also being seen as an empty space. So our mindset that we are, our policy solutions are seeing these places as empty spaces when there is existing human and non-human presence there, and there is nature there, that is completely missing. So, what is happening is, and I'll finish in about five minutes or so, that law and policy, unfortunately, in India, is constantly, both urban planning as well as environmental regulation is playing catch up. It's constantly playing catch up. And again, I'll illustrate this quickly through 5 points. One, the first point is about looking at every city and has master plans or town planning plans. These plans are yet to seriously embrace the environmental question. Is master planning done keeping air pollution, cities, forests in mind? Our master plans, which are, or other planning exercises which are looking at mobility solutions, are primarily looking to transport cars and trucks rather than human beings. The idea of pedestrian infrastructure is not the idea of a good life. You don't really bring that into master planning exercises. Number two, ecological understanding of a lived environment is missing. So a tree, and there are the squirrels over the trees, the birds that come, the bees, the microorganisms. You don't imagine this very much part of environment regulation, or especially in lived environments. So our tree laws in most cities are just playing catch up to really figure out how to actually give permission to cut 20,000 trees in an urban area because a peripheral ring road or something else needs to be built. And cities environment is, nature is in rural areas. Environment is supposed to have urban areas is supposed to have landscaped gardens, so that's the way we approach it. Third, there is a resistance towards public participation and impact assessments for urban projects. So urban projects are the projects where there has been push. I mean, in fact, when if you know about the environment impact assessment notification, when it was being amended in 2005, the big pushback from the real estate sector was that we are not an industry, we are not polluting, because the only effluent is human waste, and the only pollutant is human breath. So these are the kinds of arguments that were given to keep the building and construction sector on the periphery of the impact assessment procedure. Public participation is missing for these projects. You don't need public hearings for it. And I've highlighted these questions before as well, that there is a question of, the catch-up is because the question of where do you cite what kind of project is again completely, that environmental understanding or the lived environment understanding or the broader definition of interrelationship with environment that I gave is actually missing. So I'll just end with, just highlighting the importance of, understanding the environmental question within policy that we are talking about, not just as a technical or a scientific or a legal matter. Try and understand it as a political matter. And if you try and understand it as a political matter, the question of how we create and recreate spaces through a broader socio-ecological understanding and by embracing democratic processes can significantly shape how we plan for urban environmental resilience. And I'll just, so when you're imagining policies or designing laws, just keep that in mind. And we can carry on further. Thank you.
Yes. So, ma'am, thank you for your session. So, we have a couple of questions. So, I'm going to collate them together and give them to you, and then you can take them up as you want to.
Okay.
So, or do you want me to give you individual questions and then you want to take them up? Howsoever you want to do this.
Either way. It's in the chat box, is it, or there more?
Yes, it is in the chat box.
Okay.
So, the first question is, you can refer to it while I read out for your convenience.
Sure.
How can authorities combat shortage of semi-urban areas, shortage of population in semi-urban areas while keeping check on emissions due to construction? That's one. Another very interesting question is, what are your views on degrowth strategies where we can concentrate more on organic cities as opposed to smart cities? And in the same vein, someone asked that the idea of walkable cities as they exist in Europe, something on those lines. Another very interesting question that I would also want you to take up is, in policy, do we concentrate more on biodiversity and preserving that as opposed to human-centric development? Those are the main questions that I would like to take you up.
Okay, so I think these are very, well thought out questions. And I think, let me start with the question on how much should policy making focus on, I'll go bottom up, how much should policy making focus on biodiversity conservation as, compared to human-centric development? I think that goes to the heart of something that I was trying to speak about, and also how we need to reshape policy and our legal understanding of the environment. Because you see, the problem of how environmental law and policy has been designed is that it is approaching environment from the human point of view. It's a very anthropocentric approach to environment. So we do not, if that's why a tree is a hindrance, because you don't really see it as it's coming in the way of looking at a developed, sort of. So you don't see, when you're cutting a tree, you do not see the wildlife on it. You do not see the kind of species, the jamun, the fig, all that. You don't see very much part of it. So policy should definitely be much more socio-ecologically focused. And I would not make it only biodiversity, because actually, fruit-bearing trees are as much part of the species, the non-human species, as much as it is part of our human civilization. So even if it's human-centric, even if we are looking at the people who are making the policy are human beings, but you have to focus, you have to really embrace the idea that there is a world out there that even we might have created in a city that is non-human, through our, by living and creating those spaces. So very much, we definitely have to build in. That's why recreational areas are getting turned increasingly into government spaces. So that is what I'm totally in sync with that question. Also expanding the idea of walkable cities. I think this is what I was trying to think of. Pedestrian infrastructure in India is still not seen. So I'm totally for walkable. I mean, I would like right to walk being very much part of our neighborhoods. We should be able to move it. We should be just able to just get up and walk to spaces. But I think two things we need to keep in mind. First, we have to give up the idea that only those who can't afford automobiles walk. There is an inherent. I'm trying to bring in the question of hierarchy here, because it's unless and until we change that mindset. This is the big problem, because unless and until we change that mindset that only those, cycling is something people who can't afford motorbikes, or walking is something people do because they can't afford any other way of moving to one place to the other. So it's not a good idea for most places. It's not a modern idea for many places. The other question we have to address when we are talking about walkability is the question of safety, and I think that's when we get into the gender question. Where walkable cities have to also be safe cities. So lots of families will not allow women to walk or children to walk because it's not safe. So I think these are questions we'll have to take along so that's why the environment question is much broader question than just trees, birds, wetlands, etc. It's a much more socio-political question. So we have to bring all that intersectionality together to be able to, deal with the idea of walkability, and also people to accept and embrace it. So while it's a very positive value for us, it's not the same for many others who are seeing it and approaching it differently. Degrowth strategies. So these are very deep-seated ideological questions. There are people who are embedded with the idea of growth. So degrowth is something that is really, cities particularly are seen as places which are you are running away from, and rightly so to some extent, the backwardness of rural life or etc. Those are kinds of places that you're moving away from. So degrowth is definitely a positive idea. But how do you actually locate it in urban cities, which are also seen as spaces where people are moving away from the hierarchies and problems and discrimination of rural areas and coming to cities? And how do we actually speak about this concept with all kinds of people who are living in the city, with, as I said, across religion, across caste, across gender, and only then develop this idea. So, of course, I will not disagree that smart cities is not really the most positive way to go about things. And what you're saying is about organic cities is definitely is an idea we need to embrace, but we need to broaden it much more and bring in different kinds of the social hierarchies to be able to debate it in terms of what it means to different people.
Another question, ma'am, that I would like you to take up is Akshat asks, how do we, when we're talking about thought and deep-seated ideologies, how exactly do we work on that, especially in the policy sector, people who make policies? And along with that, if you can also take up the question which talks about climate activism and its impact on policy making, how does that impact in India at least?
Okay, so first question is about how do you deal with the ideological question, is it?
Yes, especially in the policy sector for environment. And the other is the impact of climate activism.
Mm-hmm. Okay. See, I think one of the first things we need to do is to, when we are talking about the ideological question or the political question, is to recognize that it is a question. I genuinely feel that, you know, the policy making space is highly technocratic. It relies, so while science and technology is important in that space, we have to be able to say that the science and technology is actually operating in a stratified society. So if your policy space starts with that question, that is a beginning to really be able to deal with it. So your master plan, then when it's imagining a city, is not imagining only commercial real estate or government offices. It is imagining when it's a landfill, who's living around that landfill, whether they have a equal right to a clean environment or not. So, you know, the 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 very question of the questions of what is whether walking is a good idea or not, or how do we locate certain facilities in certain places, first is a recognition of the problem. I think we are also hesitant to even state it upfront because politics ho jata hai. And you know, it's like it's too difficult to handle. So let's bring in you know, instead of dealing with how we use and you know use and throw things, we actually decide to build, bring in and embrace smog towers much more. So I think recognizing a problem is the first step. It's going to take a really long time. uh, Recognizing that the people who are doing the shittiest jobs in the city are actually deserve an equal right to clean and neat environment. They don't have to live in the kinds of places that they are having to live in. So I think some of it we need to be able to shed. And I think, I mean, people who worked on a lot of urban issues have also spoken about it. But bringing the environmental question along with all the other social justice questions of the city and the human rights question of the city, and trying to talk about it together, I think that is a very important beginning. Climate activism and how it impacts in policy. I think this is it is beginning to have a very strong impact, because I think a lot of people, many more citizens have embraced climate activism in the last couple of years, especially when it comes to things like air pollution and you know, rivers getting all polluted. We didn't see this kind of activism in the last before the last 3 or 4 years. It's people are out on the streets, children are raising very important questions, young people like all of us, I'm including myself, are also trying to raise all of these questions. So I think it's good that the government knows that this is not a closed door affair, that every action of ours is linked to a global problem. I think that kind of stuff is very, very critical. But I think after we have established the fact, after we have established that this is a problem and climate change is a problem, after the urgency has been established, solutions have to be also lying in localized places. So all of us who are trying to raise big questions have also need to start getting involved in more localized problem solving. Only then that connect will be clear. Otherwise, you know, things tend to be in the air much more, in the stratosphere, in the climate much more than on the ground. So bringing policy that links the bigger, the problems of the air and really grounded issues, say taking up something about a wetland cleaning next to your home, or cleaning up, or a landfill issue, or where the siting of a waste to energy plant is located, or construction dust. Actually, localizing and bringing it on the ground will make policy much more grounded, and not only in the air. I think that interconnections we definitely need to try and bring in.